that's how I define marketing is strategic influence. It's about leading the way toward a mutually beneficial exchange with another person. And 1 out of 3 people in the world claim to be a follower of Jesus. So if you're trying to influence people, whether it's in you're trying to communicate an idea, trying to get more investors, you're trying to get more deal flow, all these kinds of things. Look no further than Jesus as an example and as a place to really derive some principles to undergird your approach to marketing.
Welcome everyone to the Kingdom REI podcast. I'm your host, Ellis Hammond, founder of the Kingdom REI Mastermind. And this is the show to help you as a kingdom-minded real estate investor and entrepreneur really learn to have an impact, become more profitable, and really make a difference through your real estate portfolio. And so excited to have a great guest, another podcast host who's been in this space for a really long time, an incredible marketer who I think is going to bring a ton of value to you, to your business, to your walk with God today, Mr. Darren Shearer, host of the Theology of Business podcast. What's up, man?
Hey, Ellis, thanks for having me. Good to connect.
It's been a long time coming, man, seriously. So give our audience just some context, if they haven't been over to the Theology of Business podcast or they're not familiar with Highbridge Books and your media company. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, man, in this space.
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit. I was in the Air Force, and at that time, my thought was that ministry was something that kind of happened out in a church building or through some kind of a church program. And I was leaving the base, leaving work one day, and I rode over these railroad tracks to go. I was going out to do some volunteer work through my church, and the Lord spoke to me and said, "This base is your ministry." And so that was kind of a shift for me in my thinking, because I grew up in as a pastor's son and kind of thought that that's what ministry was all about, was kind of in a church. But that was a pretty revolutionary moment for me. So kind of fast forward, I ended up going into seminary following the Air Force, and then went to business school. And I met this guy at it was some kind of a networking event, as CEO of a construction company. I told him I was in seminary preparing to go into business. And he said, "Oh, so you must be going to become a televangelist." And so he thought that was kind of the limit of career paths for people that were Christians, that were, really sincere about going deeper into the things of God and theology and everything, going into business. And so in business school, I was really kind of wrestling with, all right, God, I know you want me to start a business. What's it going to be? And he really kind of directed me to look at what he had already kind of brought me through and some of the experiences I had. And looking back on some of the work that I had done when I was in seminary, teaching academic writing, and was an English major. And I had already just published my first book around that time. And I really felt like the Lord was leading me to start a book publishing company. So since then, published about 130 books. And in the midst of that, also teaching people, what does it look like to run a business on biblical principles. And so I've kind of view myself as like a crash test dummy for that, trying to live that out day to day in my business, and then teaching it through blog and podcasts and so forth.
Where did your passion come from? Like, you started in the Air Force, and then this company. I mean, early on, it seems like, you have a podcast called the Theology of Business podcast. Where does that, I don't know, that passion or that really interest in the scriptures, the Word of God, theology, where does that come from?
Yeah. So like I said, I was in seminary, and then I went to business school, and there was virtually no overlap between the two. It was like in business school that the Bible was completely irrelevant. And then in divinity school, seminary, business is completely irrelevant. Aside from, okay, student, if you're going to graduate and you want to go start a church, you better find some business people who can, help back the work that God has called you to do. And having just been, I've taken a pretty active role in a lot of the churches that I've been a part of, and just, kind of been disappointed in the way that business people have been treated as basically ATMs for the church. And yet, if we're really going to be making disciples, which is the calling for every Christian, is to make disciples of all nations. It's not to go make a profit. It's not even to go build churches. It's to make disciples. The primary place we're going to do that is in the marketplace. That's where virtually all Christians work. That's where virtually all non-Christians work, is out in a for-profit company. And so, and I know that your listeners are out there in real estate. In fact, I do a little bit of, couple of properties that we've started to dabble in. So there's definitely an interest as well for us.
There you go. So I'm excited to talk about this topic we have today, man. You've written a book on this. And the reason I'm excited to talk about this idea of marketing and marketing like Jesus is because sometimes I always joke with our community, like, we struggle with the marketing piece, or the real estate industry or real estate leaders, don't always see themselves as marketers. And, we're good investors, we're decent at managing wealth. But like when it comes to marketing, this is a huge part of our business in finding deals and raising money. And we really have to begin to see ourselves as marketers. And so, man, I love this topic because I love learning about the life of Christ, but then also taking things from his life. And, we joke like Jesus was one of the biggest, if not the biggest influencers of all time. Like, there's so many leadership and business principles to take from the life of Christ as well. And so let's dive into this topic a little bit. What caused you to want to write this book and even kind of explore this idea of marketing and looking at the life of Christ to do so?
Yeah. So when I really started to dive into the intersection of the Christian faith and business, I was looking for something that was going to be relatable for people. And that was also exciting to me because I was really studying marketing and studying Jesus. And so in that particular season, I just really camped out in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I was at the same time reading a bunch of the classic marketing books, and started to observe some of the overlaps. And like you said, Jesus, the most effective influencer, that's how I define marketing, is strategic influence. It's about leading the way toward a mutually beneficial exchange with another person. And 1 out of 3 people in the world claim to be a follower of Jesus. So if you're trying to influence people, whether it's in you're trying to communicate an idea, trying to get more investors, you're trying to get more deal flow, all these kinds of things, look no further than Jesus as an example and as a place to really derive some principles to undergird your approach to marketing.
All right, so dude, I love marketing. I mean, let's get into this. Like, I don't know if we have time for how many you have, like 25, I think. Like, what do you think is be most relevant and practical for this audience in really learning to really market like Jesus? What made him such an effective influencer? Let's talk about that starting.
Yeah, I think one of the aha moments that a lot of our authors have, because, Alice, as I said, I work with authors, and a lot of times when I ask the authors, who's this book for? The answer I'll get is, oh, this book is for everybody. Well, that's nice. That's well and good, but to really reach everybody, you're going to have to start with somebody to start a fire. The whole thing doesn't just go up unless you just doused it with, gasoline. Then it's going to be kind of a, over and done kind of thing. But typically you're going to start with some kindling. You're going to start with a couple of sticks. Right. And so you need a target. And I know that there's a lot of different categories of real estate, and, maybe somebody's out there trying to get into real estate. Well, let me just um, uh, I'm looking for a real estate deal. Well, concentrate on a particular category. Somebody, a woman came to Jesus for healing for her demon possessed daughter, and Jesus said, "I have come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And he did end up delivering that young girl, but he was making the point that I've come for a very specific ethnic group, and even within that ethnic group, a very specific group within that, the people that were on the fringes, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So these were the people that he brought onto his core team. They weren't the power brokers of their society. They were the outcasts, the people that were just the nobodies in society, or at least, in Matthew's case, he was certainly an outcast, but people that were on the fringes of the society. And he said, that's who I've come for. So that's who he brings on his core team. That's where he spends his time. And so, like, Ellis, how does this play out with, like, how do you convert that to your real estate investors when you encourage them to really target and find a niche within this?
Yeah, it's everything, man. Like, and I'm so glad you said that. Like, the key to really influencing, I think, a lot of people is you have to know who you're speaking to. I mean, the reality is you can't just start influencing everyone. Like, you really do have to have a niche and get really clear on who you serve. I mean, especially when you're starting out. We talk about this in raising money and raising capital and going seeking investors. One of the things, again, I didn't have much of a real estate experience when I started. And, so coming out, what was I going to do? Go talk about my big track record, of like buying a bunch of deals? No, I didn't have that. So the thing that made me different or distinct was my background as a pastor, was my passion for faith and my ambition to want to figure out how do we use real estate as a vehicle to not just create wealth, but really serve those who are part of these transactions. And that idea, like, I casted that vision out to those who I thought would resonate with that. And that was really what kind of gave us a foundation to begin to build off of and begin to raise money and do more deals. And so I think you're so right on, man. Is like, do you know who you are? What makes you different? And then do you know who your audience is, who you're speaking to?
Yeah. And, and with that is you speak the language. You speak the language of kingdom-minded, ministry-minded people that are out in business, that are specifically seeking to become or to grow as real estate investors. And so the stories that and the language that you use, another example from Jesus is his use of stories. Probably a third of Jesus' teaching consisted of stories, of these parables, to make what he was teaching more relatable and to connect on an emotional level. I mean, when you start talking about, and this is not about manipulation, there are a lot of like sleazy manipulators out there, but you're being who you are, and you're going to attract who you are, who you want, not who you want. And I think that's another lesson from what we can learn about the way Jesus targeted. Well, he himself was positioned as a tecton. He was an ordinary carpenter, right? And so he kind of attracted that type of blue collar person onto his team and the people that wanted to follow him. So, who is Ellis Hammond going to attract? People who are, if you're listening to this, you're probably a kingdom-minded, ministry-minded real estate investor. And so the more you can get that dialed in and really just go all in and not try to hide that, especially when it comes to your Christian faith, like, aside from you're not going to be as effective in your influencing people in your real estate investing, like, it's not going to be an effective witness for Christ if you're not really bringing your faith out to the forefront.
Yeah. I think that's really good. I'll talk about story real quick. I think story is everything. Like, you don't sell a product, you have to sell a story, right? And I mean, I just think, and this is where I think real estate estate investors kind of mess up is they're always trying to sell the real estate deal. And I'm like, listen, man, real estate is not unique. Like, there's nothing sexy about real estate. Like, there's nothing sexy about a 2 to 3x return over the course of 5 years. Like, quit selling that. Quit trying to market that. Bring people into the story that you're building, how this can change their lives. You even think about the vision that Jesus casted in the story of the kingdom coming, right? Like, it wasn't just about forgiveness of sins and salvation. No, Jesus was selling the story of the kingdom and inviting people into that. And then having I'll pause there and let you respond, but I think you hit it on the head, man, where you talk about story.
Yeah. And that's a very different approach than just leading out with kind of the facts and figures about whatever that property is. It's got X amount of square footage, it's got this amount of bathrooms, bedrooms, like people need to know that, but that's not always what's going to really sell them on what you're trying to sell them on. It's the deeper story, like connecting with them on an emotional level. Like, I don't know, Ellis, you take real estate pretty seriously, but square footage probably doesn't connect with you on an emotional level quite the way somebody telling you a story about that community and, how that, like a bit about the history of that community and how, being an owner of this particular property is going to bring you into the story of that community. Like, I mean, I love history. I love really sensing that I'm part of something bigger. And I think a lot of people are like that. Why? Because we want to know that we're part of a story. Like, we're not just, it's not somebody just, throwing facts and figures at us. There's the old adage of sell the hole, not the drill. So people they're not necessarily looking just to have a drill. They want the hole that the drill can make. But even then, they don't just want the hole. Like, why do they want the hole? Because they want to hang a picture of their loved one, who maybe isn't around anymore. And so they want that. Ultimately, that drill ends up being the tool that allows them to remember their father or their mother. Like my dad passed away recently. And so it's like seeing pictures of my dad around my house. Like, it's just, it's pretty sensitive to me right now. But I think selling that, don't just sell the deal, don't just sell the property, but really present the story, like invite somebody to join a story, not just to join a deal. You can tweet that, Ellis.
Let me ask you this. Do you think, as Jesus has an example, that always talk about, how polarized, like you talked about being open about your faith can maybe push people away, right? Like, the same way people want to sell their book but they're not necessarily being polarizing enough to really get people's attention or attract the right audience. Do you think being polarizing is a marketing strategy or even an influencing strategy that we learn from the life of Christ? Of course, I don't know if Jesus was intentionally trying to be polarizing, but he was bold about, he offended a very large population, including the Pharisees, right? And so what do you think about that from learning from the life of Christ and applying that to marketing in our business?
Yeah. I think it comes down to knowing your target. So you got to identify your target, and then you got to really study that target. I was thinking about how Jesus called Nathanael and said that, here's one in whom there is no deceit. And Nathanael's like, how do you know me? And he said, that I saw you sitting under the fig tree. And so Jesus knew his disciples before he ever actually called them. So he really studied them. I think there's a lesson for us to know who our target is. And I don't really think it's wise to talk to people as though they're Christians if if they're not Christians. Like this is a conversation that comes up again and again with our authors when they're trying to figure out, because our approach is, like C.S. Lewis said, we don't need more Christian books. We need more books written by Christians. And that's sort of a paraphrase of what he said. Because you have to identify, am I going to assume that the people reading this book are Christians, or assume that some of them are, some of them aren't? And you just have to kind of tweak your communication that way, but not hiding who you are. Like, definitely present your story, like present who you are, but don't use the Christianese on somebody that, they don't really get it. They don't know what you're talking about, because that's not a good way to connect with your target.
Unless you're trying to connect with folks who use Christianese language or whatever, right?
Yeah. I mean, if that's who you're targeting, then go all in on that.
I think what's interesting too, Darren, is like, I think part of the reason a lot of people struggle with marketing is like they're just not comfortable with who they are, and that, oh man, if I talk more about this, which is something you're passionate about or something that you have an identity in, like faith, for example, that you're going to offend or people won't work with you. And I sometimes think like it's a struggle with just accepting who you are and what you're passionate about, and being okay with, honestly, some people just may not like that, and that's okay. Like, I think Jesus was incredibly comfortable with who he was and his message and his mission, so much so where even those who he was really close with, he sometimes confused them, put them off, offended them, right? And he was like, you guys just don't get who I am yet.
Yeah. And I mean, that's where it goes back to, you're going to attract who you are, not necessarily who you want. And so that's ultimately going to be probably your target. I think a lot of, real estate investors, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but I mean, like if you kind of grew up in the residential real estate, development, then that's probably the kind of real estate you're involved in right now, and if you're an industrial person, that industrial real estate might be your game. So, but definitely stay true to who you are, bring that to the forefront.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Anything else about kind of marketing related that you want to hit on before we move on?
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that, and we pray this over our authors, that they would step out and really be bold in presenting their message and their stories that God has given to them. Because I mean, if you don't, who is? And every real estate deal, again, is an opportunity to share a story, to invite somebody into a story. And I mean, if you're that believer who has an opportunity to go into a deal with somebody, and regardless of who it is, and you really bring your story to the forefront, they're never going to forget that. Like they're going to associate, when they think about maybe something you said during the process of closing that deal, that went beyond just the facts and details of the specs on the property, that there was an emotional connection. Like they're never gonna forget that.
By the way, man, I love that even the way you're doing business right now, like praying this over your authors to really be bold about their message. That's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus was telling people, if you want to follow me, you need to go sell everything you have and then come follow me. Like you need to let the dead bury the dead. Like then come and follow me. Let the dead bury the dead. So extremely high cost to what Jesus was offering. And I'm guessing that you're not, when you're entering into a deal or pitching something, it's probably not on par with what Jesus was asking, but what Jesus was willing to give. So Jesus is asking people to literally leave everything. Like, so that's not where we are. Like, if we're calling people to become followers of Jesus, yeah, like that's one thing. But you're just asking people to, in our case, like buy my book,
Mm-hmm.
or for an investor, like become a part of this deal. Put some money on the line, and be proud of what you're offering, because Jesus was proud of what he was offering, and but he expected that people would, if you're going to be able to participate in this, you're going to have to put up the cost for it as well. It's going to cost you something.
What's actually the name of your book, Darren? So if folks want to go read this or grab a copy of this, they can go search this and get this. We'll put this in the link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's Marketing Like Jesus, 25 Strategies to Change the World.
I love that. And then, I mean, dude, you've gotten all kind of great content around there about theology of business and even helping people think practically about, are they being biblically responsible, or what would be the language you use, the assessment you have to help folks just even assess practically, how they're leading their business like Christ. Tell us a little bit about that and where folks can go to learn about that.
Yeah, it's called the Christ-Centered Company Assessment. And so there are 50 biblical business principles that you can rate yourself on, rate your company on. It's not so much rating yourself as the CEO, as the founder, but it's rating your company's operations, your company's marketing, your risk management, accounting, HR, all the different major facets of running a business. And then what we're in the process of producing are commentaries on each of those to explain the biblical framework for each one. And some of those we've already put out on theologyofbusiness.com. People can get to, but the assessment is at theologyofbusiness.com/assessments.
Theology of Business /assessment, plural or singular? Assessment or assessments?
Plural, because we also have a spiritual gifts in the marketplace assessment that has been a part of my other book, The Marketplace Christian, a practical guide to using your spiritual gifts in business. Mm-hmm. And so we're turning that spiritual gifts assessment into an online assessment people can take.
I love that. Guys, Darren is he's rock solid. Been following him for a while, so make sure you go check out his stuff. Theology of Business Podcast, theologyofbusiness.com is probably just the best place to get started and following his journey. And then go check out this assessment. I think it would be really helpful, especially for a lot of folks. And then the marketing thing, man, I love that we can learn some of these things that we talk about every day that really Jesus knew, he practiced, he lived out. And so, man, Darren, thanks again for just your love for Christ, your, I guess, meditation of his life and the way that you're beginning to kind of bring that into the marketplace, man. Really thankful for your partnership in that too. Yeah, well, we're at it together, Ellis. Thank you for what you do, brother. All right, man. Guys, everyone, thank you so much for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, let me remind you, take a screenshot, post this on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you do social media, tag Darren, tag myself. Let us know your big takeaway. Invite somebody else to come check out the show. I will see you next week. Cheers.